Hello, humans, and welcome to another Unleash webcast. I'm Derek Irvine, Senior Vice President of Client Strategy and Consulting at WorkHuman, and today I'm joined by Claire Wilden, Global Reward Program Director at AstraZeneca. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Derek.
We're going to have a great fireside chat because we're going to be looking at how Claire has created a global culture of connection and innovation at AstraZeneca, and what that's been like, especially in a time with so much rapid change and intensity in our industry. It has been a difficult time for all of us, Claire, no doubt about it, but especially in your industry. First and foremost, though, I do want to take us through some housekeeping notes to make sure that you get the very most out of this discussion. We do urge you to use the chat facility because we'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. You'll find that at the top right-hand part of the interface. It'd be great for you to engage with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and what's interesting about this topic to you. Also, right next to the chat, you'll also see a questions tab. And there's no better time than now to think about what question you might like to submit. Again, we'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and we have time at the end of our discussion to answer as many of those questions as we can. This presentation will be available on demand with a summary article at unleashgroup.io afterwards. So looking at today's agenda, what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about AstraZeneca's new global employee recognition program, which is called Catalyze. We're going to be talking to Claire about how that was lifted off the ground, as it were. It's approaching the first year anniversary, so we want to hear about the success of the program, what you've learned. We want to hear a bit about what's next. And as I mentioned at the outset, we'll have a Q&A for everybody. But first of all, Claire, over to you. I mean, everybody is familiar with AstraZeneca before, and indeed, especially thanks to COVID and the pioneering work that you're doing in helping humanity at this time. Do you want to take us a little bit through the story and the numbers of AstraZeneca?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if we were doing this a year ago, not everybody would have heard of AstraZeneca, but we're in a very, very different world now. But it's actually really quite a large organisation. You can see we've got a huge number of employees spread geographically across the globe. And we actually do a lot more than just the vaccine as well. So it's a pharmaceutical business that we specialise in 3 core therapeutic areas. So we look at CVRM, which is cardiovascular, renal and metabolism medicines. We also have a big specialist area in oncology and also in respiratory products as well. So the vaccine was actually something that was reasonably new to us, but that's what we're known for most at the moment. But behind the scenes, we're still developing all those other products in those specialist therapy areas, because our whole purpose is to make sure that we bring life-changing medicines to patients across the world. And we do this by driving scientific leadership, but also creating a great place to work where people can collaborate and innovate across the organisation to bring those ideas together that fuse together to bring those medicines through to our patients. So patients are at the heart of what we do. And so connecting and sharing innovation is so important in driving our business.
Well, what an important mission to be on, and how wonderful to see that the humans that are doing this also agree that you're creating a great place to work at the same time. You mentioned some of the values that we'll come back to during our webinar that I know it's important for you to emphasize. But before we do that, talk to us a little bit about Catalyze, the employee recognition program. And there's a tremendous story, if I remember, around the naming of this.
Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to introduce a global program for our recognition and to give it a name that everybody could identify and resonate with. So we actually did a whole crowdsourcing exercise out to the business as part of starting to engage them with the idea of moving to one global approach. And we looked at all the names that came back, and there were some familiar ones in there that we've seen in other organisations such as Thank You and Bravo and We Appreciate. But actually Catalyze was the name that really stood out for us. And the reason it stood out is because if you think about what a catalyst is something that actually takes part in a chemical reaction to ignite things, to spark things, to set things off and to speed things up. So creating connection and innovation. But actually, the catalyst itself in that reaction doesn't change. So we felt that there was a link through to the science, but also through to our diversity, that people should be allowed to work in the organisation without having to change themselves. So there was also the added advantage, of course, that it had an A and a Z in it, so we could make it personal to AstraZeneca as well.
Yes. You know, only a group of scientists could have such a carefully considered and such an appropriate name, because that's a wonderful description, you know, in terms of energizing, accelerating connection between humans. Because at the core of what we're talking about here is the opportunity to create great connection in the workplace. And we all know Brené Brown has spoken very often at Work Human Live conferences, and she talks about connection being at the center of humanity, that when we feel more connected with each other, and that's especially difficult at the moment, we're just better humans. We're better in every respect, and better in all of the things that you mentioned are important to AstraZeneca. So I think it's the most wonderful name possible in all of our stable of recognition names.
Thank you.
So talk to me a little bit, Claire, about, you know, you had a previous recognition initiative, but then you went and you built a business case. And here we are looking at a screenshot of what your Catalyzed Employee Recognition Program looks like. What was that like as you presented the business case and won support for it?
Yeah, so we'd always recognised that recognition was really important within the organisation. But what we had found was that it was actually taking place in different pockets across the organisation. We had various different providers, different approaches, and it was inconsistent. And it was also very difficult to recognise people globally. So our business runs on a global basis rather than on country basis. So actually, if somebody wanted to recognise somebody from India and they were based in the UK, that was really hard to do. So we wanted to be able to move to something that was a truly global approach and global scale, so that everybody had the equal opportunity to really engage with it. And that actually also gave us the advantage that we could unite around our common goals. So we'll talk a bit more, I think, soon around the values that we had. And it gave us an opportunity to really bring those to life as well. And by having a single platform that everybody would know through the name of Catalyze, we could actually have instant recognition as well. So we didn't have to wait for nominations to go through to payrolls to be processed. It's literally instantaneous. It's so easy to do on your mobile phone that we knew that it would be meaningful because it would happen in the moment. So it really helped to facilitate that for us as well.
Great.
Well, all that sounds really great, but one of the things that we think that really also helped the business case was that we didn't have the data on how recognition was happening. So when we initially went to the leadership team and they said, well, how much do we already spend on recognition? I wasn't in a position to really be able to tell them. There were a couple of programs that we had in some of our larger locations, but overall, we didn't have one easy place to bring together all of that information to say, well, what are we investing? What return are we actually getting on that? And as a company full of scientists, you can imagine they're all really, really interested in data. So having one platform gave us a great opportunity to bring all of that together as well. So that was quite an easy way of selling that into the board to say there's going to be a huge amount of data that we can get, not just only on what we're spending, but on how people are connecting, and also about what skills are being recognised. So where are pockets that we've got of skills that we're seeing? How is the organisation collaborating? So the data that we're getting out of this is also so powerful, and that was an important part of our business case as well.
Great, Claire. And I suspect a lot of the people who are listening in the audience are in maybe a similar position to where you were a number of years back, where, you know, not global, not having the data, not being able to see the behaviors, not having a simple place where you could celebrate quickly. Because I know in discussions before, you made the point to me, what was different about the new program, or what did you want in the new program? And it was kind of everything that you couldn't have in the old situation. So it's wonderful to see such a consistent global approach. And you're going to tell us a little bit more about that now, because I know, for example, one of the really important things that you do in your business is you link the recognition to the core values of AstraZeneca.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 5 core values at AstraZeneca, which I think is shown on the slide. So we play to win, we do the right thing, we follow the science, we put patients first, and you've seen that in our vision for the company, and we're entrepreneurial as well. So actually, Catalyse gave us such an opportunity to really bring these to life, because through looking at all of the wonderful messages around the recognition, we can really see those behaviours coming to life. So every time someone's nominated for an award, the person nominating them has to link it back to one of these key values. So it's given us great stories that we can now share across the organisation, where we're seeing people living these values every day. And then you'll see on the end, actually, we also have a new recognition value for this year as well around COVID-19. Because as you can imagine, in our organisation, there has been a huge amount of work put into responding to the global pandemic that we're seeing at the moment. And we wanted to be able to recognise people for that separately, and to get an idea of where all that work was happening within the organisation.
So if I'm not mistaken, this is almost like a story tapestry of the culture at AstraZeneca. Is that a good way of describing it? That at any moment you could look into the recognition platform and you could see all of the stories, all of the goodness that are happening literally at a moment.
It is, and it's great. Through the connections that you have through the platform, you can see what others are working on, and that actually generates more ideas and generates more recognition. So it's actually bringing the organisation together and connecting people who may not have connected on certain things before. So yes, it's creating a stronger culture as we're united on those values, but actually it's also connecting the organisation just in the work they're doing as well, and engaging people with some of the amazing things that we're doing in science to bring those new medicines out to those patients.
Right, great. Well, we'll come back to that connection point again in a moment, I know, because it's so important. But one of the things that I wanted to share with the audience is, it's almost like a secret sauce when you think about other HR levers that you've got. Recognition is one of these unique levers that we're truly discovering over the last, I think especially the last 5 years, though I've been in this business now about 2 decades, but it's especially in the last 5 years that we've really seen the data coming through solidly as companies like yourself have been ramping up strong global recognition programs. And we see the impact in all sorts of metrics. And at WorkHuman, we have about 50 million data points that we're now able to analyze and see the impact that the likes of a Catalyse program is having. And really, it's across all industries that we see these types of impacts that we're seeing on the screen right now. Because we know that people do respond to being acknowledged for their hard work. They want to feel appreciated regularly. And when we've studied that, we see all sorts of positive results coming through in terms of reduced turnover rates, higher performance, and increased engagement scores. And it's all linked to the level of recognition. We very often get the question, how much is enough recognition? And what I would definitely say is one recognition a year is not enough. And in fact, the answer to that question is that more. There doesn't seem to be a limit. The only thing that stretches the limit, I would say, is a lack of authenticity. That when you continue to have authentic recognition for work being done, then more is the answer, because it generates positive results. And what's especially encouraging as our WorkHuman IQ analytics team study different business metrics is we see this positivity across virtually every business metric that we've discussed, we've looked at. So I know it's early days right now in Catalyse, but we'll get to some of the data that you're seeing. But maybe before we get to some of your data, Claire, tell us a little bit about how you brought it all to life and the launching of Catalyse.
Yeah, I'm just smiling at the picture there because we had great fun actually launching the programme. We were lucky that we had such backing from the senior leadership within the organisation as well. So right from Pascal Soriot, the CEO, was passionate about the programme. So actually released a video on the day of launch for us, congratulating and thanking the employees for everything that they had been doing, particularly around the COVID stuff. So the timing of it was absolutely spot on for that as well. But actually, it was an organisation approach. It was a change in mindset of the organisation to move to peer-to-peer recognition real time. So we actually needed sponsorship throughout the organisation, through our senior leadership, and engaged with some change makers as well, who were able to really bring it to life. Now, we had wanted to do some really exciting on-site events for our people. But unfortunately, with the lockdown in various locations, that wasn't possible. So we did actually have to change our plans a little bit with more focus on digital. But actually, what's been nice about that actually is the fact that everybody felt involved in it and had the time to connect with it in a digital way. So actually people felt more included in the launch than actually having to wait to actually physically go to a site to be able to engage with it, especially when we have a large population of sales representatives who aren't actually on site anyway. So it was a real leveler doing it in a digital way and gave us a real opportunity to do something a bit more interesting and exciting for the launch.
Yes. And I'd have to say congratulations to you, because I think you were quite literally our first client that launched in a post-lockdown environment. Because as you said, everything was prepared for the physical, the exciting, physical events. And within just a handful of weeks, the entire pivot. So congratulations to you, the team, the change makers, which is a very important element. In other organizations, we also often talk about cultural ambassadors or recognition ambassadors being a key lever to help spread the message. And tell us about the 4th. Let the 4th be with you. It was the 4th of the month, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the 4th of May. So it's May the 4th be with you. So that was the day that we actually launched our program. That would be why that's on the slide there. Yes.
Good. Excellent. So I know it's early days, but I want to take a look at some of the learnings and some of the data that we've had. So Claire, when you think about some of the learnings and the data, talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, the launch has been phenomenal. First of all, you can just see on there that we've already had over 250,000 recognition to date already. So if you just think about that, it's just such a phenomenal number of people recognising each other for the great work that they're doing every day that makes a real difference ultimately to the lives of patients. So that actually equates to a recognition moment at AstraZeneca every 1.1 seconds. Which is just phenomenal to say that it's so embedded in the culture in that way. And it's been particularly great because of COVID. It's really given us that platform to really recognise people, as there's been a huge amount of hard work this year, ongoing work, people working huge long hours, and having something that allows us to quickly say thank you. We see you, we see what you're doing, we see how you're making a difference, has really encouraged them to keep going through these difficult times. So it's been absolutely phenomenal having the programme to be able to support COVID particularly.
Yes, absolutely vital, I would say, to be able to give that sense of encouragement in these difficult times. So I know you have many observations on some of the things that you feel have especially worked, some of the learnings. Maybe take our audience through all or some of these.
Yeah, so we've had some really great engagement across the organisation with the programme itself. And you can see on the slide that particularly our oncology colleagues have been really, really good at recognising each other. But we have had some challenges as well. There have been some cultural challenges, particularly around China. So we're having to think differently how we're engaging with them, using WeChat potentially, and thinking about actually how do we celebrate teams as well as individuals more appropriately. Because in China, they just feel that they want to share the recognition more broadly, and Catalyse does allow us to do that. We've also seen great buy-in from managers across the organisation. So you can see that 60% of our managers have recognised someone in their team just in that first 6 months. We want this to be a true peer-to-peer recognition programme. So we're looking to not only have those line managers engaged, but also encouraging that peer-to-peer recognition. So it doesn't matter what job level you are, who you report to, where you're located in the world, you feel empowered to recognise for anybody for something that they've done different in the organisation.
I love that, that peer-to-peer, that because old traditional recognition programs so often were built upon the manager had to see everything and decide everything. And that's such a speed bump in my experience. So I'm delighted to hear you say how important that is, that peers can recognize each other. And another really important bullet point to call out there for our audience in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen as I'm looking at it is employees who give and receive recognition are more engaged and less likely to leave, that it's just as inspiring giving recognition as it is receiving recognition. Because when you give recognition, you're pausing to think about who it is you're working with, the skill that they display, the behavior you want to see more of. It's not just the person who's receiving, it's just as healthy and just as encouraging for the person who's giving it too. So it's great to to see that come to life in AstraZeneca, the culture of celebration. Good. So here's a real eye chart, an interesting one. I need to explain this to our audience, but this is what we call a social graph. Claire and myself have been talking about the importance of connection and the importance of collaboration leading to innovation. And this is a chart that quite literally shows how AstraZeneca workforce collaborates, because every dot is a recognition moment. It's somebody celebrating something fantastic you did, a behavior I want to call out, living our values. And the lines between each of those dots shows the extent to which people from across the organization in different teams, in different divisions, different territories geographically are working together and recognizing each other. So I think, Claire, when I think about any other HR metric, I don't know that we have any other HR tool that offers this type of incredible insight into exactly what we're looking for, connection between humans and therefore evidence of collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And this picture is actually one of my favorite ones. It's a really exciting picture because what we're looking at here is innovation actually happening live within the organization, the connections that are taking place, ideas being shared. So this just really shows, the power of those connections and how innovation is happening. Which is great because when we're such a big organisation, what Catalyse has done is allowed us to connect in that way. And yeah, it's just one of my favourite things out of the programme that we've seen is this whole energy that we can see of people connecting.
Yes, absolutely. Here. So let's look at another very interesting chart too, because you talked earlier about the core values at AstraZeneca and how Catalyse is focused around the core values. So this is a representation of the words that nominators are including when they're recognizing colleagues for each of those values. So it's really great, first of all, to see that the word patient is one of the biggest words that's most commonly used, because you said earlier that's in your core mission. But talk to me a little bit about, what this chart means to you and the insights it gives you.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing patients in the middle there as being the most popular word used was just really rewarding for us to see, actually. When we're saying that patients are at the heart of everything that we do, we can literally see it at the heart of this picture, that this is what our people are talking about, and patients are foremost in their mind when they're working every day. It was also great to see the link back to all of our values as well. And it's interesting that the Play to Win category is actually the one that was most recognised in the organisation, that people resonated with most. However, it was the one with the fewest words. So it made us think that actually people really understand what it means for that value. What does it mean within the organisation to Play to Win? But it's going to be really interesting to really look at these words here, see what people are talking about. And we're actually also going to look at the skills as well. Are we talking about the skills and recognising the skills that we think are going to be important to our organisation going forwards as well when we look at what people are recognising?
Yes, that is a fascinating point. And it's that smallest grouping of words, the Play to Win. And as you say, I think evidence that there's a consistent vocabulary at AstraZeneca. Also it's to a point we made earlier, it's like a tapestry of how the story is told on a daily basis, the story of life at AstraZeneca. So incredibly valuable. And of course, as we ramp up our natural language processing capabilities, all sorts of soft skill identification becomes possible, because you can see what soft skills people are being recognized for. So very exciting new frontiers coming up on all of this. So Claire, exciting times ahead. Tell us a little bit more about what's next for Catalyse.
So we're coming to the end of our first year, actually. So now we're getting some really, really good data that we can really start looking at actually what's happening within the organisation around recognition, but also so much more as well. So we're going to be spending some time working with the WorkHuman IQ team, who've got really good experience from other organisations looking at connections and patterns across organisations. But you'll have seen that one of our values is obviously we play to win. We are competitive. So we do want to benchmark ourselves against other organisations in our field, but also actually generally across industry to see how we are doing. We want to make sure that we have got that culture of recognition truly embedded across the organisation. So we have that recognition really embedded in the way that we work together every single day. But actually, there's also more that we can do within Catalyse now, because, as I said, I love that connecting diagram that we had. So it's going to really now allow us to look at where we've got those communities of innovation really happening in the business. So we can look at what's happening there, so we can replicate it, we can magnify it across the organisation. So we're looking at where have we got best practice going on, where are our role models, who are those people who are actually driving innovation through those connections through the organisation. But also it's allowing us to look at where those skills are actually being demonstrated in the business, those skills that we think are really important to the success of our organisation going forwards. Because we often have them identified. Somebody may say, I have this particular skill, but what Catalyse is doing is actually truly validating those skills true real time, because someone's being recognised for those skills. So it allows us to identify where those skills are in the organisation. So again, we can build on those. We know who the people who are good at these things and get them to develop others to make sure that we have the strengths that we need to be successful as an organisation for the future. So when we bring it all together, actually, it really is driving a change in our organisation. Over 250,000 recognition moments so far. It's really having patients at the centre of it. It's making a big cultural change for AstraZeneca.
Yes. I mean, those are great things. I'm sure many people in the audience are thinking, promoting and helping DEI initiatives, soft goal identification of people that are the connectors, that are the innovators, encouraging innovation, encouraging engagement. I mean, what incredible levers recognition can be at the end of the day. So, my hat off to you, Claire, and all of the AstraZeneca team for your ambition and drive in delivering such an innovative, thoroughly global and impactful program. So to the audience, just remember, if you have any questions, do put those questions in the top right-hand side. We are monitoring the questions as we go along. But if we look at some of the key takeaways, as I mentioned, I think for me, certainly global consistency has been one of the big points. Many people have recognition initiatives that are traditionally formed. They don't have the data, they don't have the technology, they don't have the global consistency. So that's a huge breakthrough, I think, for what we've been able to do together in partnership. I think also another big takeaway is the focus of the celebration, the focus of the thank you is around things that are really important at AstraZeneca. You're encouraging and you're celebrating when people are living the behaviors, the core values, the things that we know strategically and mission-wise AstraZeneca wants to encourage more of. Your tremendous buy-in from senior leadership. You did a great job at pitching the business case, but also related, and of course that's fundamental, but also related to that, I was really encouraged to hear you talk about the power of peer-to-peer and enabling the population to feel like they can thank each other. And then two, you mentioned just a moment ago about the importance of benchmarking your own progress and wanting to ensure that recognition could be a contributor on many different business goals. Because a lot of people think recognition, that's the thank you program and it's in a particular box. But you've outlaid many different key business goals that you see recognition contributing to. And I mentioned it earlier, in my experience, I think recognition can be that kind of secret sauce that a lot of HR professionals yet haven't really seen the full potential of. But you've seen it, Claire, and you're demonstrating that completely. So if we move into the close on the fireside chat part, we will have a Q&A, Claire and myself, afterwards. But just a quick plug for some other activity. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more about other inspirational stories, companies that are implementing new and exciting recognition programs, we would love you for us to join us at WorkHuman Live in May. This is the premier event for HR pros. As well as hearing from your peers, you'll get to listen to some of the industry's most influential thinkers who are helping to shape and make a more human workplace. Indeed, for the first time this year, we're hosting not one event, but actually two events, a North American event on the 18th of May, and also one with a specialist European slant on Thursday, the 20th of May. They're digital events. They're completely free to attend. So just go Google WorkHuman Live or head to workhumanlive.com to sign up. Okay, so thank you, Claire, for that lovely fireside chat, very informative. And now the Q&A is coming up. So please remember to pose those questions for us. We're looking forward to taking your questions now.
Thanks, Derek and Claire. Welcome to the Q&A section of the webinar. And thanks for the audience for being here from such far-flung places. I notice Margate, Memphis, Scotland, Switzerland, all over the world. I'm Ian McCauley from Unleash's content team. And in this section, I'll be posing your questions to Claire and Derek. I can see there are loads of questions already on top of the ones I've got for them too. So we'll get through as many of those as we can in the next 30 minutes, and let's dive straight in there. And it's a question for Claire, my first one. What sort of process did you go through to actually pick and build the recognition platform, and who at the organisation was involved in that? Was it sort of multidisciplinary?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had to look at various different aspects on that. So we did put a team together to look at the market to see who were the best players in the market to provide a recognition tool. What was most important to us really was having somebody who could actually give us a true global experience for all of our employees equally. And that was really important because we wanted that global recognition, anybody anywhere in the world to be able to recognise somebody else quickly and easily real time, because for recognition to be really impactful, you want it to be more or less instant so people can really connect it to what they've delivered. So having somebody have that global capability and consistent experience locally in terms of how you receive the recognition was really important. So that was one of our key criteria. But we did put a multidisciplinary team together. We made sure that finance were involved, we had legal involved, we had HR involved, but we also had representatives from the business as well to make sure that this actually landed culturally within the organisation as well when selecting our supplier.
Brilliant, thank you. And I noticed there was a question about whether everything was switched on at the same time. Did you go live in all markets all at once? And what were some of the challenges involved if you did?
Yes, we did actually. So that's one of the debates that you have to go through as a project team for the launch is, do you do a pilot somewhere or do you go with that global big bang? We actually went with the global big bang on the basis that actually we do work in global teams. So for it to really be effective, we needed to make sure it was a truly global program. Now, one of the challenges you have around that is that there were various works councils that we needed to make sure were comfortable with the approach that we were taking. So we needed to make sure that was all aligned to be able to go with that global approach. But actually it went really, really smoothly. The platform's so easy to use globally. Actually, it wasn't an issue in that big bang go live. And I think that really helped with the success of the launch, actually.
Thanks.
It's a very common concern. You know, folks often say, but we're so different in our country. We're so different in our team. The nature of recognition that we need is going to be different. And I often say to people that in my experience, the only qualifier that you need to receive the type of recognition that Catalyze represents is that you're human. So we build the recognition program, you know, catering to humans. And I think the recognition industry, the traditional industry, hasn't really had the type of global capabilities that are now possible. And they're required because organizations like AstraZeneca and many other large organizations are in multiple countries, operating cross-geographic teams. And that's why our platform works in different languages. It's sensitive to different cultural needs. There's different local reward options. There's things like standard of living indexation automatically built in the back scene so that somebody receiving an award in England for £100, you know, in India, that doesn't get represented as £100 directly translated. It's something that's an equivalent purchasing opportunity in India. So there's all sorts of things built into the platform to make it work on an international level. And that's why we could confidently turn it on in one switch of the button.
And just so coming on to that, actually, I'm really fascinated with, because of the times that we live in and everyone or most people having to dive into these things remotely, does the fact that maybe everyone's not sitting in the same room anymore, seeing this come up on the projector screen and being taken through how it's going to work, does that actually provide more opportunities to do more interesting and interactive things with launches such as these? And I'll pose that to Derek first, I think, if that's all right.
I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. COVID has actually given us a gift, and the gift is this ability to virtually connect. I've certainly attended a lot of webinars, meetings, trainings that just seem to be better attended because it's so much easier to do so by sitting and switching on. So that has certainly happened. And that's a gift that I think we'll continue to reap as time goes forward.
Claire, any thoughts on that? Were we already in sort of COVID times and remote working when you started planning this, or did you have to pivot to a different approach for launch?
No, we had to pivot very much last moment, actually. So, but I think that one of the things that was also important to us was that the platform that we were using was really, excuse me, intuitive. So we didn't need to do training on how to use the tool. The real training and focus was around when is recognition really appropriate, and how do you make recognition impactful. So it was more the cultural side of it that we had to focus on, rather than actually using a practical tool itself. So that was by producing lots of videos. We had lots of senior leaders telling stories about what was important about recognition for them, to help bring it to life as we did that launch. So actually everybody globally could see those senior leaders talking to them, rather than actually having smaller local events where actually some of that messaging may have got diluted. So to Derek's point, to some extent it was a bit of an advantage.
Brilliant. So just moving on, there's a couple of questions here about the nuts and bolts of running this on a day-to-day basis and how people interact with it. What is the process then of someone, if someone wants to recognise one of their peers, how does that work? And how is that then communicated to their team or to the wider business? Sorry, that's a question for Claire.
It's me. So quite simply, you either go to the platform on your laptop, or actually very easily on your mobile phone. You can easily select the person that you want to nominate for an award. And what the tool actually does is gives you your circle. So it looks at those people it knows those people who you closely work with. So they're very easily accessible to nominate, although you can search for anyone in the organisation. You literally will click on that person's name. Then in our instance, you can go through and choose the value that you want to recognise from that individual, how they demonstrated their contribution to the organisation. And then we actually have a tool that you can go through to help guide you on the most appropriate level of recognition. I think managers often feel, or anybody in the organisation feels a bit nervous about, are they recognising at the right levels? One of the advantages of Catalyse was it allowed you to go through, it was 5 simple questions that helped guide you to what would be the appropriate level of recognition for the contribution the individual had made. So it's literally a click, click, click. It gives you the recommendation that you can actually override if you want to. And then actually, depending on how your organisation is set up, it can go through various approval levels if it needs to, which is very easy. It just comes through in an email or on your app that you can click that you approve or reject it or comment on it. And it's as simple as that. Then it goes through and the person will be notified that they've received an award, either in the app or into their email.
And do you have a way of distributing that information or publicising that information to the rest of the organisation, or is it very much kept within the teams?
So within your circle, actually, you see everything that's being recognised within that circle if it's been made public. So we have to also recognise that a lot of people, or some people, may not feel comfortable with their achievements being broadcast. So you do have the option of marking something as private when you're either making the nomination. You can make it private, for example, if it's sensitive in some way. Or as an individual, you have the ability to set your own preferences to say whether you want your celebrations to be shared publicly or not. So it does have that flexibility in the platform to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting subject because, Derek, I'll ask you about, I think, inauthentic experiences or recognition. So that authenticity, how do platforms like these actually give people a really good experience, whether they're recognising someone else or whether they're being recognised?
Yes. I mean, it's one of the concerns that I often hear is people say, but what if we have too much recognition happening? And I often ask an audience, put your hand up if you've experienced an overdose of recognition in your career. And most times not a single hand goes up, because that is not a problem to be concerned about, an overdose of recognition. But I think what we can be concerned about, as you said, is inauthentic recognition, or essentially what might be considered an abuse of the system. This kind of, you give me recognition, I'll give you recognition, table tennis of recognition happening. So again, we do have tools. I mean, as Claire mentioned, it's very easy to recognize somebody, but behind the scenes there's a whole layer of manager approvals, which different clients get to set at different levels according to the level of recognition that's being given. As well as that, there is fraud detectors where our system will literally detect if there's a kind of an inconsistent, unusual flow, and we get to notify the HR partners in our client organizations to spot that. So we're spotting those levels of abuses. But then there's other very simple abuses that a well-intentioned manager might slip into, thinking that oh, the bonus wasn't really good enough this year. Maybe I can sneak some additional compensation to somebody by giving them some additional recognition. And they're just not the right ways to go about it. And again, we have ways of catching that and the HR partner getting involved. But I'll give you another really interesting example too. And this is something quite exciting because we're building it into our product now, a natural language processing detector, which will in the moment provide some guidance about the type of language that people are writing. Because this is a really interesting area. You know, employee recognition is all about language with each other, messaging each other about what we feel about each other. So if we have a tool that's able to look at that language and say, if I'm writing a message to you, Ian, and the message starts with, nobody believed you could do it, Ian, but it seems like you've pulled it off against all the odds. Congratulations, and here's an award. I think that the advisor would present, well, hang on a second, did Ian achieve this or not? Because you want to be really giving Ian kudos for arriving at the end goal, not mixing that message with some awful stuff about, you know, Ian is suddenly thinking, nobody thought I could actually achieve this. Nobody said that to me.
That's right. There's an adage, isn't there, that in football or in sport, if you give the most improved player of the season of the award, what does that tell them they were like the previous season?
True.
So it's that type of thing, isn't it? There's a few questions around the mechanics of peer-to-peer, which is obviously a really fascinating part of this. In that peer-to-peer recognition, how is the financial side of that managed? Is that specifically run by the managers, or because, as you were just saying then about, you know, you could give your mates recognition because they're going to get a financial reward? How does that work, Claire?
So, you know, as Derek has said, there's sort of anti-abuse reporting, so we can see where we see patterns that we may need to intervene with where behaviour's not been appropriate. But actually, we really did want it to be peer-to-peer. So we've left it open to anyone can nominate anybody else in the business, irrespective of their career level, their location or their role. So it is truly open. And the vast majority that we see going through actually is non-financial. It's just a thank you is, you know, the most that we see going through. So we don't have any approvals around a thank you. Anyone can say thank you to somebody in an organisation for something that they have done. But where there is a monetary amount attached to it or a value attached to it, then actually that does go through an approval level. And we made sure that our first approval level was always the individual's line manager. And that was for a couple of reasons. One, because we wanted to make sure we didn't have any duplicates. So you might have multiple people nominating the same person for the same thing. So we wanted to make sure that we had the ability to only recognise somebody once for what they had done. But also because actually it was really nice for every line manager just to have that visibility around what somebody had done in their team, so they can also join in that congratulations. And actually the tool allows all your colleagues to comment around, you know, on your recognition and what you've achieved as well, and congratulate you. So it's a bit of a multiplier effect because you get that good feeling through the whole team around everybody's contribution.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question for Claire. It's kind of a catch-all, really. Is how can you encapsulate what Catalyse has done for AstraZeneca so far in terms of engagement and that just company culture globally and even in local markets too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've just got to see the number of recognitions that have gone through that we can actually see that happening. And I think as well, you know, the diagram that Derek shared around the connections that we've seen across the organisation, you can actually see how the organisation is actually collaborating. You know, there's research that shows that once somebody's been recognised for something they've done, they're twice as likely to do something for that person again. And we can see that. We can see that actually the power of the recognition, the connections are getting stronger, the collaboration is getting stronger. And actually people are, especially with COVID going on, we needed to be able to say thank you to our people for everything they were doing. And that didn't need to be money related. Sometimes, you know, the impact of just being, you know, observe. We've seen what you've done. We've seen the impact that you've had, and to be recognised for that is phenomenal on how people feel, and it's kept the enthusiasm going through the very challenging times that we've had in the last year.
Brilliant, Derek. I appreciate I'm jumping around quite a lot here, but there's so much to cover, and there are lots of questions coming through as well. I just wondered if you had any advice for people in the audience from global companies in particular, or international multi-market companies. If they want to roll out something unified and global, how do they even think about replacing local systems? What are some of the top tips in terms of the process that you need to go through to successfully do that?
Yes. Well, I think what Claire has just done, I believe, is largely an example of that. And it's a common journey where, as I said earlier, that tends to be the legacy of traditional recognition programs are country by country. So you want to play to the common thread, and the common thread for sure is the humanity. But then underneath that humanity hood is the need to create connection. And that connection is human moments will happen in all of these different countries, but those human moments do need to be in language. So the platform will need to deliver in local languages. We have 34 languages live on our platform today, including left to right languages and all around the globe. You also need to make sure that when an employee is nominated for something, in this instance, they receive points. If they've done something really big, they receive a bank of points that they can use. Need to ensure that those points are relevant and usable in the marketplace that I live. No point in receiving, some points that are only going to be used on some obscure website in the United States. If I happen to live in Singapore, I'm going to want to use it in a local department store in Singapore or local merchandise that will show up within a matter of days, won't have customs complications. The rewards need to be truly local for that marketplace. So language is important. I mentioned earlier, standard of living indexation inside the platform is important. The rewards are important. And then rolling out globally, it's not as difficult a challenge as I believe some people imagine, because global organizations like AstraZeneca are very used to doing this already today with so many other corporate initiatives. Recognition in many ways is the laggard, that it hasn't caught up to internationalize. But I think that's because the capability just wasn't there until, dare I say, that the likes of our experience has become available.
Brilliant. And Claire, similar question to you, really. What are your experiences of having gone through that, replacing the local systems or augmenting them with the global platform? How has that been for AstraZeneca?
Yeah, it's there were some challenges in some places where people were wedded to their local systems, but it's talking about the benefit across the whole organisation. I think I said at the beginning around the fact that if you can actually recognise somebody from the UK from India or vice versa, you couldn't easily do that for it. It was way too local, and that's not how the business was working. It was working far more on a global basis. And the door was really open for it, actually, as well. I think that people really wanted to recognise each other for the work that they were doing. So it was a reasonably easy sell into the business, actually. And it was just making sure that it was done appropriately was the challenge, really, that we had.
And of course, the last point just to add into that is the data insights that become available, the consistent insights into the behavior, the connections, the soft skills, who's really good at innovation, who's an incredible cultural energizer. To be able to see those pictures at a macro level is tremendously useful.
But I guess, Derek, if you mine that data as well, you can discover what each different country and even down to what each different team is really good at, can't you? So that's important.
Absolutely.
As well.
I mean, that's the exciting new frontiers. We're finding all sorts of new uses that our HR partners are using with this data. Exactly as I said, who are the cultural energizers? Who needs to be in the succession planning? Because very often those are the people that are receiving a lot of recognition for something that might be a surprise. It's also a tremendous retention tool. Very expensive talent that perhaps isn't receiving enough recognition. That's also an indicator that we need to double down and say, well, why is this team of expensive scientists not receiving recognition sufficiently? And maybe, it can be sometimes a speed bump of a manager that maybe is uncomfortable with this, which of course, again, is why peer-to-peer is so important, because now you enable the people around that scientist to be the ones that are spotting the great work. So there's all sorts of incredible insights that are coming out of this data. I think we're only just beginning on a journey that's going to be very powerful around, digging into those soft skills.
Yes, Claire,
just to build on the the data piece, I think I've seen in the chats some questions around how do you sustain the engagement and excitement around this tool as well. Now there's obviously things that you can do around there's global events such as Appreciation Day. There's also company events that we can link things to as well. But what we've also used is the data to see who is good at doing this recognition, who's had a really good impact doing this. We can actually now see that. We've got those people as role models. We've used them to tell their stories about how it has changed their teams, how it's driven the collaboration in their teams. to actually show what the impact and the power of recognition can really be across the organisation as well. So data has really helped us to look at those interventions that we can use to actually improve the uptake of this across the organisation and continue the momentum behind it.
And will this Claire, this data form an important part of AstraZeneca's retention strategy, as Derek was just saying?
Absolutely. It's not just retention. It's as Derek was saying, it's about looking at the skills. Where have we got the skills in the organisation, where we can see that they're actually truly being recognised? Those are probably hotspots of people who can then actually train other parts of the organisation in those skills, or they're people who are there for development and movement into other areas of the business. So the data is really, really insightful on how the business works, and we're definitely using it strategically moving forward to influence how our workforce planning.
So we've talked about a little bit about how this tool is incredibly necessary to help with the world of work, the hybrid working during COVID. How will it be put to use once that we've got this sort of people going back to the office, when, fingers crossed, that's allowed in all the countries where people are in the audience? How important is this going to be as a unifying recognition platform for people wherever they're working? Go for Derek there first, please.
I mean, I don't think the need goes away by any means. I mean, what we're describing here is something that is heavily utilized by many of our clients pre-COVID. This is not a COVID specific. So the need for human connection in the workplace, I think, is enormous right now. I think we've gone through. We're dropping industrial revolution ideology. We're dropping command and control ideology, moving to much more agile working systems in our workplaces. And what supports agile is human connection. And I think this sits exactly into that space. It encourages that human connection. But there's also another very interesting theme, which is really bubbling up a lot at the moment, which is diversity and inclusion. And I think the data in the recognition can also be very powerful in influencing more inclusion. It can be the bridge between, you've got your diversity, but how do you really ensure inclusion? Because the data, for example, shows all sorts of interesting things, like women have bigger connection networks in the workplace than men. Now, the women on the call are probably in the audience thinking, well, we know that. Whereas the men are saying, what?
Just keep an eye on the comments, yeah.
But that's true. That's what we see. The women have stronger connection networks thanks to recognition in the workplace. But what's also really interesting is the women tend to receive smaller rewards. Now, why is that? Men tend to give bigger single amounts more infrequently, whereas the women are better at giving smaller amounts more frequently. So there's all sorts of interesting DE&I conversations too, I think, that we can be advancing with the help of a technology that really doubles down on our human connection in the workplace.
Claire, do you have any insights specifically on DEI and how you're able to use that data moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to Derek's point, that actually we really have been looking at that data to see where, is there a specific area where you need to have an intervention, have some conversations around the importance of inclusion and how to make sure that you're being consistent and fair in how you're recognising people. But I think also the advantage is that we can actually benchmark ourselves against other organisations as well. So, by looking at we did for a very short period look like we had women being recognised with lower values than men, but it seems to now have turned around actually. So we've seen a change there. So it gives you that insight into what's the messages that you need to put across the business around and D&I as well. So, but also some of the reporting really helps just for a manager themselves. They can see across their team, who have they recognised, who in their team have recognised other people. So they can look at some specific behaviours as well to really manage at that team level.
So, Derek, this type of approach can really revolutionise the business from top to bottom, can't it, in terms of the workforce?
Yeah, like I mentioned, I think, the workplace just needs more humanity. I mean, how many of us would vote for a more human workplace? A workplace where we didn't feel like we had to check ourselves in at the door to adopt some sort of industrial revolution uniform, that said that we were a number, we needed to, do our annual appraisal in a formulaic way. Instead, to feel natural, to feel we can bring our whole selves, to thank our colleagues generously and often when we see them doing great things, have authentic conversations with each other throughout the year, celebrate our genuine life events together, our birthdays, our moving houses, or getting new pets, bringing our humanity into the workplace. That's what we're focused on. And in fact, that's why our company is called Work Human, because without the human, you could say there's only work. And how boring is that?
Thanks, Derek. Claire, we've only got time for a couple more questions, I think. If you had to do this all over again, would you do anything differently? It's obviously been a successful rollout, but what sort of things might you do differently next time that the audience could take away as an insight as well?
Oh, that's a good question. It did go really, really well. I think don't underestimate, the change management around this. I think I touched on making sure that you're doing that education piece around how to make recognition impactful. I think, Derek talked earlier about the messaging and how, it can have a negative impact on people, but it can also have a positive impact in how you work things. So we did see at the beginning some things like just saying thanks. But actually what you really want people to do is to say, this is what you did. This is the impact it had across the organisation, because then people understand what they need to do, what they need to build on, what they need to do more of. So it's a really good feed forward tool for individuals as well. So I think that piece, don't underestimate the amount of change to put through to really get people's mindset in the right place of having meaningful recognition.
Is that something that echoes with you, Derek, as well? Is it, make sure that you're aware of the amount of change that's going to take place, even if it is mostly positive?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a high degree of change, but what I would say is that change will naturally occur when you allow the population to take control. Old school recognition assumes that the recognition is owned by HR, and that the culture is somehow owned by HR. What we're describing here with Claire and with all of our Work Human clients, the recognition and the culture is owned by everybody. It's everybody's responsibility. So the change will occur, and there'll be dynamic, positive change, but it will happen as a consequence of the crowd and the crowd getting involved. So frequency is really important. And I think we've mentioned that, quite often, how much recognition is enough? The answer is more of all sorts of varieties. And then the crowd will just take over, and that change will happen in front of your eyes, which well done to Claire and the AstraZeneca team is what they're experiencing today.
And Claire, then finishing on a positive note, what would you say? I'll allow you to pick 2 or 3 if you want. What would you say the most, the biggest benefit for your role and your team has been of seeing this all come together?
I think that actually for our team, we've been looking actually at how do we drive performance across the organisation. So actually, this hasn't been something that you look at in isolation. It's just a programme that you're putting in. It's part of actually how do you drive that everywhere. So it actually needs to dovetail with all of the other ways of recognising people in their total reward and actually looking at their development in the organisation as well, and how does it marry across to recognising people for their potential as well. So actually it's made an impact in that it's one of the things that we can do to really transform how we work together.
Fantastic. So unfortunately, we've come to the end of the Q&A now. So thanks for everyone for watching and for sending all your questions. Apologies if we didn't get around to answering them. We did try and take as many as possible there. The webinar and the Q&A will be available on Unleash's website, which is unleashgroup.io, within a company article soon. So all it remains for me to say is thanks very much for watching, and of course thanks to Derek and Claire for the fascinating insights, and enjoy the rest of your day.